The kitchen timer chimed as I pulled the 20th dish from the oven, a bubbling cassoulet, my late husband's treasured recipe. My arthritic hands trembled from exhaustion, the antique wall clock reading 5:13 a.m. on Easter Sunday. I'd been cooking for nearly 30 hours straight, stopping only for brief moments to gulp down lukewarm tea and double-check my handwritten menu cards. At 70 years old, I'd hosted 52 family gatherings in this old Victorian home, but never had I felt so invisible as when my own family filed past me to the dining room I'd spent days preparing, only to discover they'd arranged the seating chart without a place for me. What happened next would shock them all, especially since proper grandmothers like me weren't supposed to stand up for themselves. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains of my kitchen windows, casting delicate patterns across the marble countertops. I'd inherited this home from my mother, who had inherited it from hers. 3 generations of women who had poured their love into feeding their families beneath this roof. My daughter Eleanor always called it the legacy house, though lately, she seemed more interested in discussing its market value than its memories. I wiped flour-covered hands on my apron and surveyed the culinary landscape before me. 20 elaborate dishes, each one representing a family member's favorite or a treasured tradition. For the grandchildren, individual chicken pot pies with their initials cut into the crust, macaroni and cheese with 4 artisanal cheeses, and sweet potato casserole topped with handmade marshmallows. For my 3 children, roast beef with Yorkshire pudding for Michael, wild mushroom risotto for Eleanor, and spiced salmon with dill sauce for Catherine. For their spouses, specially imported cheeses, gluten-free options, and vegan alternatives. The crowning glory was an heirloom recipe Easter lamb roasted with 40 cloves of garlic and fresh herbs from my garden. Desserts included a 3-tiered carrot cake, chocolate soufflés timed to perfection, and my famous lemon chiffon pie that had won the county fair blue ribbon 5 years running. My pantry had been emptied, my savings account lightened, and my body pushed beyond reasonable limits, all for this day, this gathering, this expression of love through nourishment. The Easter celebration had grown more elaborate each year since Harold passed away 3 springs ago. Perhaps it was my way of filling his absence with activity, of proving I could still hold the family together without him. Or perhaps it was simply that cooking had always been my love language, and with 17 family members expected today, I had a lot of love to express. I permitted myself a rare moment of rest, easing down onto the kitchen stool that Harold had crafted for me. On our 40th anniversary, "For the queen of the kitchen," he'd said, presenting it with a flourish. Even monarchs need to rest their feet sometimes. I could almost hear his gentle teasing, could almost feel his strong hands massaging my shoulders, as he'd done countless times when I overextended myself. But Harold was gone, and the children had their own lives now. Michael with his corporate law practice in the city, Eleanor with her real estate empire in the suburbs, and Catherine with her professor husband and academically gifted children, 3 states away. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, marking time as I checked my handwritten schedule. The family would begin arriving at noon. I still needed to shower, set my hair, and change into the lavender dress I'd purchased especially for today. Just as I was about to stand, my phone rang. Eleanor's ringtone, a businesslike trill that matched her personality. "Mother, good morning," she said without preamble. "Listen, we have a slight change of plans. Michael's bringing his new client and his wife, they're potential investors in his firm. And Catherine called to say they're bringing that graduate student from Japan who's staying with them for the semester. Will that be a problem?" I calculated quickly. 2 more adults for a total of 19 people. I had prepared 20 dishes. "No problem at all, dear. I made plenty." "Wonderful," Eleanor replied, and I could hear her tapping away at her phone even as she spoke to me. "Oh, and Mother? Michael thinks we should use the good china, the full settings with the chargers and crystal. It'll impress his clients. The Good china meant hand-washing 65 delicate pieces after everyone left. Of course, I said, already mentally rearranging my post-dinner cleanup schedule. You're a treasure. See you at noon. The line went dead before I could respond. With a sigh, I pushed myself up from Harold's stool and made my way upstairs to prepare myself. My bedroom, the smallest in the house since I'd given the master suite to visitors after Harold died, was neat and modestly furnished. I'd laid out my outfit the night before. A lavender dress with a lace collar, pearl earrings that Harold had given me on our 25th anniversary, and sensible but attractive low heels. I'd spent a ridiculous amount on the dress, but Eleanor had hinted so strongly that my usual holiday attire was becoming dated that I'd finally relented. After a quick shower that did little to ease my aching muscles, I set my silver hair in hot rollers and applied a light touch of makeup. The face in the mirror looked tired but determined. Just one more big family gathering, I told my reflection. You can rest tomorrow. But would I? There would be leftovers to distribute, china to wash, linens to launder, and the inevitable phone calls checking to make sure Michael's clients had been suitably impressed and Catherine's exchange student had felt welcomed. Rest, like so many things in my life, seemed perpetually scheduled for later. By 11 o'clock, I was dressed and back in the kitchen, adding final touches to each dish. The dining room table had been extended to its full length and covered with my best damask tablecloth. The good china gleamed at each place setting, accompanied by sterling silverware that I'd spent 2 hours polishing the previous day. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier, which I'd carefully dusted by standing on a stepladder while balancing a feather duster in my arthritic hands. Fresh flower arrangements, which I'd awakened at 4 a.m. to create, served as centerpieces, interspersed with hand-decorated Easter eggs that had taken me 3 evenings to complete. In the center of the table stood a small framed photograph of Harold, a tradition I'd maintained since his passing. He'd always carved the roast at our gatherings, his steady hands and warm smile setting the tone for our family meals. Now his picture served as a gentle reminder of his presence, a way of keeping him with us, even in absence. The doorbell rang, at precisely noon. Eleanor was always punctual. I smoothed my dress, checked my hair one last time, and went to welcome my family. Eleanor arrived first, her husband Thomas and their teenage twins in tow. She air-kissed my cheek, careful not to smudge her perfect makeup while Thomas handed me a bottle of expensive wine. "The house looks acceptable, Mother," she said, her critical eye already scanning the foyer for dust or disorder. "We brought a bakery cheesecake just in case there isn't enough dessert." I accepted the bakery box with a tight smile, knowing full well that my homemade desserts would sit untouched while the store-bought option would be praised as divine. Such was the pattern in recent years. Thank you, Eleanor. How thoughtful. I placed the cheesecake in the refrigerator, already crowded with prepared dishes, and returned to greet Catherine and her family, who'd arrived while I was in the kitchen. Catherine's husband, Professor Philip Bennett, immediately began pontificating about the historical significance of Easter traditions, while Catherine fussed over their children's appearances. "Mother, this is Kenji Tanaka, our visiting graduate student," she said, introducing a polite young man who bowed slightly. "We thought it would be educational for him to experience a traditional American family gathering." I welcomed Kenji warmly, genuinely pleased to have him. "I hope you'll feel at home with us today." "Thank you for including me in your family celebration," he replied with perfect courtesy. "Your home is very beautiful." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang again. Michael had arrived with his wife Vanessa and their 3 children, along with an elegant couple he introduced as the Prestons, Jackson and Adrienne, key potential investors in our firm's new venture. Vanessa handed me a crystal vase. "For your lovely home," she said with the practiced smile she reserved for social occasions. I hadn't seen her in 8 months, despite living only 40 minutes away. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As I placed the vase on a side table, I noticed Vanessa whispering to Eleanor, who nodded and immediately began rearranging some of my decorations. This had become normal. My daughters-in-law and daughters making small improvements to my home whenever they visited, as though my own taste had somehow become irrelevant with age. "Everything smells wonderful, Grandma," said Michael's oldest daughter, Lily, giving me a genuine hug that warmed my heart. At 16, she was the only one who still called regularly, sometimes just to chat or ask for cooking advice. In her, I saw glimpses of the close-knit family I had always tried to nurture. "Thank you, sweetheart. I made your favorite macaroni and cheese." "With the crispy breadcrumb topping?" Her eyes lit up. "Of course. Would I forget?" I squeezed her hand affectionately. While the family gathered in the living room, I returned to the kitchen to begin transferring dishes to serving platters. Nobody offered to help, which didn't surprise me. Years ago, the kitchen had been the heart of our family gatherings, with everyone pitching in, laughing, sharing stories while we worked together. Now it was Grandma's domain, a place they entered only to ask when the food would be ready or to retrieve a drink from the refrigerator. I arranged the roast lamb on my best silver platter, surrounded by roasted vegetables artfully placed to highlight their colors. The risotto went into Harold's favorite serving bowl, a wedding gift from his mother. Each dish was plated with care, garnished appropriately, heated or chilled to the perfect temperature. This was my art, my contribution, my way of holding the threads of family tradition together across generations. "Mother, we're ready whenever you are," called Eleanor from the dining room. "The Prestons have another engagement at 3, so we should start soon." "Coming right away," I responded, gathering the first round of serving dishes. My back protested as I lifted the heavy platter with the lamb, but I straightened and pushed through the discomfort. This was hardly the time to acknowledge physical limitations. I carried the lamb to the dining room, where I discovered my family already seated around the table. Eleanor was directing traffic like a runway controller. "Mother, Jackson and Adrienne should be at the head of the table since they're our special guests. Michael, you sit across from them, and Catherine, you and Philip take the sides near them, so you can discuss that research grant opportunity." I stood with the heavy platter, watching as Eleanor continued. "Vanessa, you and I should flank Jackson and Adrienne. Thomas, you're next to me. Children at the far end, of course. Kenji, you're between Philip and David." As I counted, I realized there were exactly 19 place settings, one for each person present, including the unexpected guests. 19 settings, not 20, and every chair was filled or assigned. "Eleanor," I said, still holding the increasingly heavy lamb platter, "where shall I sit?" My daughter looked up, momentarily confused. "Oh, well, I assumed you'd be busy serving and carving and things." She glanced around the full table, a slight frown creasing her perfect makeup. "We could squeeze another chair in near the kitchen door, I suppose, though it would make the service path rather tight." I felt something shift inside me, a tectonic movement of emotion I couldn't immediately identify. Was it hurt? Certainly. Anger? Perhaps. But underlying it all was a sudden, stark clarity, as if I were seeing my family and my place within it, for the first time without the soft filter of maternal obligation. For 52 family gatherings, in this home through Easters and Christmases, Thanksgivings and birthdays, anniversaries and graduations, I had cooked and served and cleaned. I had created the settings in which family memories were made. I had nourished bodies and tried to nurture connections. And yet, when the table was set for this Easter feast, there was literally no place for me. "I see," I said quietly, placing the lamb at the center of the table. "Excuse me for a moment." I returned to the kitchen, my mind strangely calm despite the emotional earthquake taking place beneath the surface of my thoughts. On the counter sat 19 individually plated first courses, spring pea soup with mint cream, each one garnished by hand. Beside them lay 19 embroidered napkins I had monogrammed myself as a project during the lonely winter months. "Mother, is everything all right?" "We're waiting to begin," Michael called from the dining room. "One moment," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. I untied my apron and hung it on its hook beside the refrigerator. I straightened my lavender dress, touching the pearl earrings for reassurance. Then, with deliberate movements, I picked up my handbag from the kitchen, counter, checked for my wallet and keys, and walked back to the dining room. My family was engaged in animated conversation. Michael was describing his latest court victory to the Prestons. Eleanor was showing photos of a luxury property on her phone to Vanessa. The children were absorbed in their devices beneath the table, a practice I had gently protested and eventually surrendered to. Only Kenji and Lily looked up as I entered. "I've prepared 20 dishes," I said, my voice cutting through the chatter. "Everything is ready to serve. The carving knife for the lamb is in the second drawer beside the sink. The desserts are in the refrigerator, except for the soufflés, which need 12 minutes in the oven at 325 degrees. Eleanor looked up, puzzled. "Yes, Mother, but aren't you going to serve the soup first?" "No," I said simply, adjusting the strap of my handbag on my shoulder. "I'm not." A confused silence fell over the table. "What do you mean?" Catherine asked, finally noticing something was amiss. "Are you feeling unwell?" "I'm feeling," I said carefully, "invisible. I have been for some time, it seems. But today, it became, what's the phrase you academics use, Philip? Empirically evident." I looked around the table at my family, seeing them with new clarity. My 3 children, prosperous and preoccupied. Their spouses, polite but distant. My grandchildren, growing up with only the faintest sense of family connection, and 2 strangers who had been given the place of honor while the woman who had created this entire experience had been rendered functionally non-existent. "For 52 gatherings," I continued, "I have cooked and served and cleaned. I have preserved our family traditions and created new ones. I have maintained this home as a place where we could come together, remember who we are to each other. And today, I discovered that in all your planning and arranging, not one of you thought to ensure there was a place for me at my own table." Michael began to protest. "Mother, that's not fair. We were just trying to accommodate the extra guests. By excluding me," I finished for him. "Yes, I understand the mathematics. 19 settings for 20 people. Someone had to be left out. And without discussion or hesitation, that someone was me." Eleanor's face flushed with the beginning of indignation. "Mother, you're overreacting. We can add another chair. It's not a catastrophe." "No," I agreed. "It's not a catastrophe. It's a revelation." I straightened my shoulders, feeling lighter somehow, as if a weight I hadn't recognized I was carrying had suddenly been lifted. "Enjoy your Easter dinner. Everything has been prepared with care. I'd recommend starting the soup course promptly so it doesn't get cold." "Where are you going?" Catherine asked, alarm finally registering in her voice. "Out," I replied simply. "For the first time in 52 family gatherings, I'm going to do what I want to do instead of what's expected." I stepped out onto the front porch, my handbag clutched tightly against my chest like a shield. Behind me, I could hear the rising swell of confused voices as my announcement registered with my family. The heavy oak door closed behind me with a satisfying thud, muffling their protests and questions. For the first time in nearly 3 decades, I was walking away from a family gathering that I had orchestrated, leaving behind 20 meticulously prepared dishes and 19 bewildered people. The spring air felt unexpectedly sweet against my face. Easter Sunday in our small town of Millfield was picture perfect. Azaleas blooming in carefully maintained gardens, neighbors in their Sunday best, strolling towards the afternoon service at St. Mary's, children in pastel outfits hunting for eggs in front yards, normalcy and tradition on vivid display, while I, Evelyn Margaret Harrington, 70 years old and suddenly rebellious, was breaking every rule of proper grandmotherly conduct. I had no plan, no destination in mind as I walked down the brick pathway from my front door to the street. My sensible beige heels clicked against the pavement, providing a steady rhythm to accompany my tumultuous thoughts. Where does one go when leaving 50 years of established identity behind? What does one do when the role of family matriarch is abruptly abdicated? My phone began to vibrate in my handbag almost immediately. Eleanor, no doubt, calling to demand an explanation or to insist I return before I caused a scene that might embarrass her in front of Michael's important guests. I silenced it without looking at the screen. Whatever crisis my absence was creating would have to unfold without my management for once. I walked 3 blocks before realizing I still wore my hostess apron beneath my lavender dress. With a small, startled laugh, I removed it, folding the egg-patterned fabric with its embroidered "Holiday Happiness by Evelyn" motto into a neat square. I tucked it into a public garbage bin at the corner of Maple and Elm, a small symbolic act of liberation. The town square of Millfield opened before me, its central gazebo decorated for Easter with pastel ribbons and spring flowers. Several people I knew nodded in greeting as I passed, their expressions flickering with confusion at seeing Evelyn Harrington out and about on Easter Sunday, rather than hosting her legendary family feast. Mrs. Patterson from my garden club actually checked her watch as if to confirm that it was indeed 1:15 p.m. on Easter Sunday, and I was indeed walking alone through the town square in my good dress. "Evelyn? Is everything all right?" she called, hurrying over with concern etched across her carefully powdered face. "Isn't your family gathering today?" "Everything is perfectly fine, Dorothea," I replied with a serene smile that felt foreign on my face. "My family is enjoying their Easter dinner at my house. I decided to enjoy the beautiful day instead." Her eyes widened slightly. "But you always host Easter. Harold was so proud of your holiday meals." The mention of my late husband might have wounded me under normal circumstances, used as it was like a gentle bludgeon of guilt. Today, however, I found myself wondering what Harold would actually think about my current situation. Harold also believed that a person should be valued for who they are, not just what they provide, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "Enjoy your Easter, Dorothea." I continued past her, feeling her bewildered gaze on my back as I walked away. My phone vibrated again, Catherine this time, according to the screen. I let it go to voicemail. The Millfield Diner stood at the corner of the square, its neon open sign glowing in the window despite the holiday. Through the large front window, I could see that it was nearly empty, just a couple of truckers at the counter and old Mr. Finley, who had been eating Sunday lunch there since his wife died 15 years ago. Without fully forming the decision, I found myself pushing open the diner door, the little bell announcing my arrival. Marge, who had owned the place for as long as anyone could remember, looked up from behind the counter with undisguised surprise. "Mrs. Harrington, well, I never. What brings you here on Easter Sunday? Is your family not visiting this year?" I settled onto a counter stool, placing my handbag beside me. "They're visiting. They're at my house right now, in fact. I just decided I needed a moment to myself." Marge's penciled eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline, but she had the good grace not to press further. "Well then, what can I get you?" I realized I hadn't eaten anything since a slice of toast at 4 that morning. "What's good today?" "Meatloaf. Special. Comes with mashed potatoes and green beans. Nothing fancy, but it'll fill you up." "That sounds perfect," I said, suddenly ravenous. "And a cup of coffee, please." "Coming right up, Mrs. Harrington." As Marge turned to place my order, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirrored panel behind the counter. My carefully set silver, Hair was beginning to droop on one side, and there was a smudge of flour on my cheek that I had missed in my hasty preparations. I looked tired, certainly, but there was something else in my reflection that I hadn't seen in years, a spark of defiance, of selfhood, that had been gradually dimmed by decades of selfless accommodation. I thought of my children sitting around my dining table at that moment. Were they serving themselves the dishes I had prepared? Were they attempting to carve the lamb, a task Harold had always performed with such ceremony? Or were they simply waiting, expecting me to return and resume my proper role once I had gotten over whatever momentary madness had possessed me? My phone buzzed yet again. Michael this time. I turned it off completely and dropped it back into my handbag. "Here you go, hun," Marge said, placing a steaming plate before me. "Best meatloaf in the county if I do say so myself." The food was simple but delicious, hearty, unpretentious, and served without fanfare. I realized with a start that I couldn't remember the last time I had eaten a meal that I hadn't prepared myself. Even at restaurants with Harold or my children, I had spent most meals mentally deconstructing recipes or making mental notes about presentation ideas I could incorporate into my own cooking. "Good?" Marge asked, refreshing my coffee. "Wonderful," I replied sincerely. Mr. Finley had been watching me from his booth near the window. Now he rose, gathering his newspaper and cane, and made his way over to the counter. At 83, Wilson Finley was something of a town fixture, a retired high school principal who knew everyone and missed nothing. "Evelyn Harrington," he said, settling onto the stool beside me with a grunt. "Breaking tradition, are we?" I had known Wilson since my children were in school. He had been a fair but firm principal, respected by students and parents alike. After his wife Marion passed, he had withdrawn somewhat, but remained observant and occasionally acerbic. "Hello, Wilson. Yes, it seems I am." He nodded as if I had confirmed a long-held theory. "About time." I paused with my fork halfway to my mouth. "I beg your pardon." Said it's about time. "You've been running yourself ragged for that family of yours for decades. Never seen you take a minute for yourself, not since Harold passed. Not much before that either, come to think of it." I felt a flush rise to my cheeks. "That's what mothers do, Wilson. We take care of our families." Marion was a devoted mother too, but she made sure people knew she was a person in her own right. Made me take her dancing every month, insisted on her painting classes on Thursdays no matter what was happening at the school, said it kept her from disappearing into everybody else's needs. I had forgotten that about Marion Finley, how she had maintained her own interests and identity even while being a principal's wife and mother to their 4 children. I had always admired her quiet self-possession, her gentle insistence on having space for herself amid her many responsibilities. "I suppose I've been so focused on holding everything together after Harold died," I said quietly. "Making sure that family traditions continued, that the children and grandchildren still had a sense of connection to this place, to our history." Wilson's weathered face softened slightly. "Noble intention. But what good is preserving family connections if they don't include connecting with you as a person, not just as a provider of services?" His blunt assessment struck uncomfortably close to the realization I had experienced in my dining room less than an hour before. I had become a function rather than a participant in my own family's life. "So what are you going to do now, Evelyn? After you finish that meatloaf, I mean." It was a fair question, and one I hadn't considered. What was I going to do now? Return home and face the confusion and recriminations? Apologize for my outburst and resume my familiar role? The thought made my chest tighten with something close to panic. "I don't know," I admitted. "I haven't thought that far ahead." Wilson nodded again, as if this too confirmed something. "That's the thing about breaking patterns. The first step is the clearest. After that, you're making the path by walking it." He rose from his stool with effort, leaning heavily on his cane. Whatever you decide, don't go backward. Marion always said that too. He left a few bills on the counter to cover his meal and touched the brim of his hat in a gesture from another era. Good day to you, Evelyn, and happy Easter. After he departed, I sat quietly, finishing my meal and considering his words. My family would be in complete disarray by now. I could picture Eleanor taking charge, attempting to salvage the social occasion, while Catherine worried about the psychological implications of my behavior, and Michael calculated the damage to his professional opportunities. The grandchildren would be both confused and secretly thrilled by the unexpected drama, and the special guests, the Prestons and young Kenji, would be politely uncomfortable witnesses to a family unraveling. For a moment, guilt threatened to overwhelm me. What kind of grandmother abandons her family on Easter Sunday? What kind of mother walks away from the meal she herself prepared? The crushing weight of maternal obligation began to descend again, familiar and almost comforting in its demands. But then I remembered the table with 19 place settings. I remembered years of planning my life around everyone else's needs and schedules. I remembered 1,000 small moments of being taken for granted, of having my time and effort and love accepted as if they were utilities, always available, never requiring acknowledgement. "Everything all right with your meal, Mrs. Harrington?" Marge asked, breaking into my thoughts. "Yes, it was delicious. Thank you." "Got room for dessert? Made a fresh coconut cream pie this morning." Coconut cream had been Harold's favorite. I had stopped making it after he died because no one else in the family particularly cared for it. "Yes," I said, making another small decision for myself. "I'd love a slice." As Marge served the pie, the bell over the door jingled and a harried-looking middle-aged woman entered, clearly on the verge of tears. She spotted Marge and hurried to the counter. "Marge, I'm so sorry to bother you on a holiday, but I'm desperate. The church basement flooded last night, and we've had to cancel the community Easter dinner. We have 25 people, mostly seniors and a few families from the shelter, who were counting on that meal. Do you have anything at all, that we could serve them?" Marge's face fell. "Oh, Linda, honey, I'm running on a skeleton crew today. I've got maybe 10 meatloaf specials I could package up, but that's nowhere near enough." I found myself speaking before I had fully processed the thought. I have an entire Easter dinner for 20 people sitting on my dining room table right now, completely untouched. Both women turned to stare at me. "Mrs. Harrington?" Linda asked, uncertainly. I recognized her now, Linda Carpenter, who ran the community outreach program at First Methodist. 20 dishes, I continued, feeling a strange sense of clarity emerging from the confusion of the day. Lamb, roast beef, salmon, side dishes, desserts, everything. It's all prepared and ready to serve. "But your family," Linda began, clearly confused, "can manage without it," I finished firmly. "Would it help? Could you use it for your community dinner?" Linda's expression transformed from despair to astonishment to cautious hope. "Are you serious? That would be... But how would we even transport everything?" "I have my catering van," Marge interjected, catching up with the conversation. "If Mrs. Harrington is serious about this offer." "I am," I said, feeling more certain with each passing moment. Completely serious. 15 minutes later, I found myself in the passenger seat of Marge's dented white van, heading back toward my house. My heart pounded as we approached, half expecting to see my family on the front lawn in various states of indignation. But the street was quiet, the house looking exactly as I had left it, down to the Easter wreath on the front door. "Are you sure about this, Mrs. Harrington?" Marge asked as she parked at the curb. "It seems like a mighty big step you're taking here." I thought about Wilson Finley's words. "Don't go backward." "I'm sure," I said, reaching for the door handle. "And please, call me Evelyn." I took a deep breath and unlocked the front door of my home. The sound that greeted me was not what I had expected. No uproar of angry voices, no emotional pleading from my daughters, no stern lecture from Michael about responsibility and propriety. Instead, I heard the muted clink of silverware against china and the low murmur of strained conversation. Linda Carpenter, the community outreach coordinator, followed close behind me with Marge bringing up the rear. The three of us paused in the entryway, and I raised my finger to my lips, signaling for them to wait. Something compelled me to observe the scene before announcing our presence. From where I stood, I could see directly into the dining room. My family was indeed eating the meal I had prepared, though with none of the joy or celebration I had envisioned. Eleanor sat rigidly at one end of the table, methodically cutting her lamb into precise, uneaten pieces. Catherine dabbed at her eyes with her napkin while her husband Philip patted her hand with mechanical comfort. Michael's important guests, the Prestons, maintained polite smiles that didn't reach their eyes, clearly wishing to be anywhere else. The grandchildren, sensing the tension, were unnaturally quiet, pushing food around their plates without enthusiasm. Only Lily, my eldest grandchild, was missing from the table. And young Kenji, the Japanese exchange student, who sat with perfect posture, his discomfort evident only in the slight furrow of his brow. I still don't understand why she would just leave, Catherine was saying, her voice tight with distress. It's not like Mother to be so dramatic. Eleanor sniffed dismissively. She's been different since Dad died, more fragile. This is probably some delayed grief response. Or maybe, Michael suggested with uncharacteristic hesitation, she meant exactly what she said, that we've been taking her for granted. That's absurd, Eleanor countered. Everything we do is for this family, for maintaining our connections. Mother understands the importance of tradition better than anyone, does she? The new voice came from the kitchen doorway, where Lily stood holding a serving dish of roasted vegetables. My granddaughter's face was flushed. Whether from the heat of the kitchen or from emotion, I couldn't tell. What's that supposed to mean? Eleanor asked her niece sharply. Lily set the dish down with deliberate care. It means that while you've all been sitting here complaining about Grandma ruining Easter, I've been in the kitchen trying to figure out how she managed to prepare all this food by herself. Do you have any idea how much work went into this meal? Of course we do, Catherine said defensively. That's why we're all so confused about why she would abandon it. Are you? Lily challenged. Because I just counted 20 dishes in there. 20! And I found her prep lists and timing charts. She's been cooking for 2 days straight. When did she sleep? Uncomfortable silence fell over the table. And none of you, not one, thought to save her a seat at her own table, Lily continued, her young voice gaining strength. Do you know how that looks? How that feels? We would have made room, Eleanor protested, if she had just said something, instead of making a scene. She shouldn't have had to say anything. Lily's voice rose with indignation. This is her house, her table. Her life's work has been taking care of this family, and you all just erased her. I felt a wave of emotion rise in my chest, pride in my granddaughter's fierce defense, sorrow at the truth of her words, and a strange sense of validation that at least one person in my family truly saw me. It was time to make our presence known. I stepped forward into the dining room, followed by Linda and Marge. 15 pairs of eyes swiveled toward us in unified surprise. Mother! Catherine half rose from her chair. You're back. We were so worried. I'm not back, I interrupted, gently. Not in the way you mean. I've come with a purpose. I gestured to my companions. This is Linda Carpenter from the First Methodist Community Outreach Program, and this is Marge Davis, who owns the diner in town. Confusion registered on every face. Eleanor's perfectly manicured hand fluttered to her throat. What is this about? There was a flood in the church basement, I explained, maintaining a calm I didn't entirely feel. 25 people, seniors and families from the shelter, We're counting on the community Easter dinner that had to be canceled." "That's unfortunate," Michael said slowly, his eyes darting between me and my unexpected companions. "But what does that have to do with—" His voice trailed off as understanding dawned. "I've offered them our Easter dinner," I stated simply. The reaction was immediate and cacophonous. "You what?" Eleanor's voice rose to a pitch I hadn't heard since her adolescence. "Mother, you can't be serious," Catherine protested. "What about—" "The Prestons?" Michael hissed, glancing anxiously at his important clients. Amidst the uproar, Kenji, the Japanese exchange student, quietly stood and bowed slightly in my direction. "Excuse me, Mrs. Harrington," he said, his soft voice somehow cutting through the family chaos. "In my culture, we believe that acts of generosity honor not only those who receive, but those who give. I would be honored to help transport the food to those in need." His simple statement silenced the room. The Prestons exchanged glances. Then Mrs. Preston rose as well. "Kenji's right," she said with surprising warmth. "What a wonderful gesture of Easter spirit, Mrs. Harrington. We'd be happy to help as well." Jackson Preston stood beside his wife. "Absolutely. Michael has told us what a cornerstone you are in this community. This kind of generosity speaks volumes about the values your family represents." Michael's expression underwent a remarkable transformation, from horrified to calculating to cautiously pleased in the span of seconds. "Well, of course," he said smoothly, rising from his chair. "The Harrington family has always believed in community service." "Mother, what a thoughtful idea." I wasn't fooled by his abrupt reversal, but I accepted it with a nod. "Thank you, Michael. We'll need to pack everything up quickly. Linda has arranged for tables to be set up at the community center, and there are hungry people waiting." What followed was a flurry of activity unlike anything our dining room had seen in years. Under Marge's efficient direction, the family began, clearing the table, packing dishes into insulated carriers she had brought in her van. Linda coordinated which items should go first, creating a logical sequence for serving the community meal. To my surprise, even Eleanor pitched in, albeit with the slight awkwardness of someone unaccustomed to kitchen work. "These serving dishes are quite heavy, Mother," she commented, as she carefully wrapped the crystal bowl containing the risotto. "Have you always carried them by yourself?" "Yes," I answered simply. "For 52 gatherings." She didn't respond, but something flickered across her face, a recognition perhaps, or the beginning of one. The grandchildren, energized by the unexpected turn of events, formed an efficient brigade to carry items out to Marge's van and the Sao, Preston's luxury SUV, which Jackson had volunteered for transport duty. Catherine's husband, Philip, normally so removed from practical matters, revealed an unexpected talent for organizing the logistics of which dishes should travel together. Throughout it all, Lily stayed close to me, occasionally squeezing my hand, or touching my arm, as if reassuring herself that I was really there, really taking this stand. As the dining room emptied and the vehicles filled, I found myself standing in my kitchen with Linda, surveying the scene. The countertops were lined with my carefully prepared dishes, now being repurposed for a completely different gathering than I had intended. "Are you sure about this, Evelyn?" Linda asked quietly. "It's your family's Easter dinner." I looked through the doorway to where my family worked together with more coordination and engagement than I had seen in years. "I'm sure," I replied. "This feels right." Within 45 minutes, nearly everything had been packed and loaded. The once perfect table now stood bare except for water glasses and Harold's framed photograph, which I had kept behind. The Prestons' sleek car and Marge's battered van were filled with the products of my 2 days of ceaseless labor, ready to nourish people I had never met. "We should get going," Linda said, checking her watch. "People will be gathering at the center soon." I nodded, then turned to address my family, who stood in various states of dishevelment and confusion in my dining room. "Thank you all for your help," I said. I'm going with Linda and Marge to the community center to serve the meal. You're leaving again? Catherine asked, distress evident in her voice. But what about our Easter? What about family time? The old guilt tugged at me, that familiar sense of maternal obligation threatening to erode my newfound resolve. But then, I remembered Wilson Finley's words, "Don't go backward." I've shared 52 holiday meals with this family, I said gently but firmly. Today I'm choosing to share this one with people who might not otherwise have a celebration. You're all welcome to join me at the community center. Eleanor looked scandalized. Join you? To serve dinner to strangers? Yes, I said simply. To serve rather than be served. To give without expectation of return. Isn't that what we teach about the Easter spirit? A heavy silence fell over the room. I could see the internal calculations happening behind each pair of eyes, the weighing of social obligation against personal preference, of family expectations against individual desires. It was Lily who broke the impasse. I'm coming with you, Grandma, she said, stepping to my side with quiet determination. Me too, said Kenji, moving to join us. In Japan, we have a concept called omoiyari, compassionate consideration for others. I would be honored to participate. 1. By one, the younger grandchildren gravitated toward us, drawn perhaps by the novelty of the situation, or by the genuine enthusiasm in Lily's voice as she described what needed to be done at the community center. Well, said Mrs. Preston with unexpected warmth, I can't remember an Easter that didn't involve rolling up my sleeves before I married into money. Jackson, we're going to help, aren't we? Her husband, far from appearing put out, seemed relieved. Absolutely. More meaningful than another stuffy dinner, if you ask me. Michael looked between his clients and his mother, clearly recalibrating his position with impressive agility. The firm has always emphasized community involvement, he declared, as if this had been his idea all along. Catherine, Philip, you'll join us, won't you? Catherine, ever sensitive to family dynamics, nodded immediately. Philip, to his credit, seemed genuinely intrigued by the change in plans. Only Eleanor remained rigid, her expression a complex mixture of disapproval and bewilderment. This is not how we do things, she said, each word precise and brittle. This is not our tradition. No, I agreed, meeting my daughter's gaze directly. It's not. But perhaps it's time for a new tradition, one that includes me as a person, not just as a provider. I saw something shift in Eleanor's eyes. Not acceptance, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. Thomas, her husband, placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. One Easter doing something different won't unravel the family, Ellie, he said quietly. Maybe we should try it. Eleanor's shoulders remained stiff, but she gave a tight nod. Fine. But I'm not wearing these shoes to a community center. I'll need to change first. We'll meet you there, I said, surprised at her concession but unwilling to press my luck. As we filed out of the house, Lily, Kenji, and the younger grandchildren piling into Linda's station wagon, the Prestons following in their car, I paused. On the porch steps. My house, which had been the setting for so many carefully orchestrated family performances, seemed different somehow. The weight of expectation that had pressed down on me for so many years felt lighter, as if my small act of rebellion had shifted something fundamental in the family's gravitational field. Marge waited by her van, keys in hand. Ready for your next adventure, Evelyn? She asked with a wry smile. I took one last look at my front door with its perfectly symmetrical Easter wreath, then turned toward the waiting vehicles and the unexpected path that had opened before me. Yes, I said, stepping forward into the spring sunshine. I believe I am. The community center at First Methodist was a modest building, a far cry from my Victorian home with its polished wood and crystal chandeliers. Fluorescent lights hummed. Overhead, illuminating walls painted in institutional beige and a floor of worn linoleum tiles. Folding tables draped with simple white cloths had been arranged in rows, each set with paper plates and plastic cutlery. And yet, as we began transferring my carefully prepared Easter feast from the vehicles, the space was transformed. The aroma of roasted lamb and garlic filled the air. The vibrant colors of my vegetable dishes brightened the sterile environment. Faces began appearing at the door. Elderly people who lived alone, young families from the shelter, a group of veterans who had nowhere else to go for the holiday. "Mrs. Harrington, this is incredible," Linda whispered as we surveyed the spread being laid out by my grandchildren and the other volunteers. "I've never seen anything like this for our community dinner." I felt a strange mix of pride and humility. The food I had prepared with such exacting standards for my family, food I had expected to be barely acknowledged before being consumed, was now being received with genuine awe and appreciation. "Where would you like me?" I asked, pulling my focus back to the present moment. "Would you be comfortable serving the main dishes?" Linda guided me to the head of the buffet line, where Marge was already setting up the carving station for the lamb and roast beef. "People will want to thank the person responsible for this feast." The position felt oddly appropriate. Still, serving others, but now with direct connection rather than from the invisible background. I tied on one of the aprons Linda provided and took my place beside Marge. Within minutes, the center was filled with people. Some arrived in their Sunday best, others in well-worn everyday clothing. Children darted between the tables, their excitement at the unexpected feast evident in their bright eyes and eager questions. Elderly people moved more slowly, many with walkers or leaning on the arms of volunteers. "Welcome," I said as the first guests approached the serving line. "Happy Easter. Would you like lamb or roast beef? Or perhaps some salmon?" The elderly woman before me blinked in surprise at the options. "Is that real lamb? I haven't had lamb since my George was alive." "It is indeed," I confirmed, slicing a generous portion. "With rosemary and garlic, just as my mother taught me." "Bless you," the woman said, accepting the plate with trembling hands. "Bless you for this." Person after person passed through the line, each interaction brief but somehow more meaningful than any of the countless meals I had served in my dining room. Here, my efforts were not merely expected, but received with genuine gratitude. Even more surprising was how different it felt to connect directly with those I was feeding, to see their reactions, to hear their stories, to be acknowledged not just as a provider of food, but as a fellow human being sharing in a communal experience. Lily worked beside me, handling the side dishes with natural grace. "Grandma," she murmured during a brief lull, "I've never seen you like this before." "Like what, dear?" "So present. Like you're really here, not just working behind the scenes." Her observation struck me. Had I truly been absent from my own life for so long, so consumed with serving that I had forgotten how to participate? The community center doors opened again, and I looked up to see Eleanor and Thomas enter, followed by Catherine and Philip. They had indeed changed clothes, into more casual attire than I had seen them wear in years. Eleanor's hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail rather than her usual immaculate style, and she looked strangely vulnerable without her armor of perfection. My daughters surveyed the scene with expressions I couldn't quite interpret, something between discomfort and curiosity. Catherine spotted me first and navigated through the crowded room to reach the serving line. "Mother," she said, her voice pitched low. "This is not what I expected." "No," I agreed, continuing to serve a portion of lamb to a young father with a toddler on his hip. "I imagine it isn't." "What should we do?" Catherine asked, seeming genuinely at a loss. For a moment, I felt the old pattern asserting itself, the expectation that I would direct, organize, and manage everyone's experience, ensuring their comfort above all else. But something had shifted in me, a fundamental rewiring that wouldn't allow me to slide back into that role. Whatever you feel. Move to do, I replied gently. There are serving stations that need help, tables to be cleared, children who might enjoy some attention. Or you're welcome to simply join the meal and get to know our neighbors. The choice is yours. Catherine stared at me as if I had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. Beside her, Eleanor's expression tightened with familiar disapproval. This is highly irregular, Mother, Eleanor said, her voice clipped. These people are strangers. What will the community think? Before I could respond, an elderly man in a worn but carefully pressed suit approached. Excuse me, he said, addressing Eleanor directly. Are you Mrs. Harrington's daughter? Eleanor straightened, automatically adopting her public persona. Yes, I am. You should be very proud, the man continued. Your mother has provided the finest Easter meal I've had since my wife passed. The kindness she's shown today, extending her family table to include us. Well, it's a true example of Christian charity. Eleanor appeared momentarily speechless. The man nodded politely and moved on, leaving my daughter to absorb his words. Across the room, I could see that Michael had found his footing quickly, networking with community leaders who had come to assist with the dinner. Ever the opportunist, he had positioned himself and the Prestons near the mayor, who had arrived to support the emergency community event. From this distance, it appeared he was taking at least partial credit for the family's charitable initiative, but I found I didn't mind. If Michael could transform this unexpected situation into something that benefited him professionally while simultaneously helping the community, so be it. Mrs. Harrington? A soft voice drew my attention back to the serving line. A young woman stood before me, a child of perhaps 4 clinging to her skirt. I just wanted to thank you. We've been at the shelter for 3 months now, and this is the first real holiday meal my daughter has ever had. The simple statement caught me off guard, recalibrating my perspective yet again. In my world of elaborate family feasts and perfectly polished silver, I had lost sight of what food truly meant, not as a demonstration of skill or fulfillment of obligation, but as nourishment, connection, celebration. You're very welcome, I said, meeting her eyes directly. I'm honored to share it with you. As the initial rush subsided and everyone was served, Linda encouraged me to take a plate for myself. You must be starving, Evelyn. You've been on your feet for hours. I realized she was right. In the flurry of activity, I hadn't considered my own needs, a lifelong pattern I was only now beginning to recognize. I filled a plate with small portions of the dishes I had created and looked for a place to sit. To my surprise, a space had been saved for me at a table where Wilson Finley sat with several other elderly residents and Lily. My granddaughter waved me over eagerly. Grandma, we saved you a seat. The simple statement, we saved you a seat, resonated so deeply that I had to pause for a moment to steady myself before walking over. Here, among virtual strangers and one attentive granddaughter, my presence had been anticipated, valued, included without question. I settled into the chair beside Wilson, who acknowledged me with a knowing nod. Quite a change of Easter plans, he observed dryly. Indeed, I agreed, taking my first bite of food. It tasted different somehow, not because the preparation had changed, but because I was experiencing it differently, present in the moment rather than worrying about everyone else's experience. Mrs. Harrington, said an elderly woman across the table, would you tell us the secret to your lamb? It's magnificent. Rosemary, garlic, and patience, I replied with a smile. And please, call me Evelyn. What followed was something I had rarely experienced at my own dining table in recent years, genuine conversation. My table mates asked questions and actually listened to my answers. They shared their own stories and cooking mishaps. We laughed about kitchen disasters and compared notes on old family recipes. No one checked their phone or rushed through the meal to get somewhere more important. We were simply present, sharing food and connection. Across the room, I observed my family, finding their way into this unexpected experience with varying degrees of awkwardness and grace. Catherine, always empathetic despite her anxieties, had gravitated toward a table of young mothers from the shelter and appeared to be deeply engaged in conversation. Philip was surprisingly animated, showing a group of veterans something on his phone, photographs of historical sites, judging by their gestures. Eleanor remained the most reserved, sitting stiffly at a table with Thomas and several elderly couples. But even she seemed to be thawing slightly, her posture less rigid than when she had arrived. The grandchildren had integrated seamlessly, their adaptive resilience putting the adults to shame. They moved between tables, chatted with strangers, helped serve dessert, and generally participated in the event with unself-conscious enthusiasm. As the meal progressed, Linda stood and gently tapped her glass for attention. "Everyone, may I have your attention for a moment? I want to express our deepest gratitude to Mrs. Evelyn Harrington and her family for providing this extraordinary Easter dinner on such short notice. What began as a crisis with our flooded church basement has become a true blessing through their generosity. Mrs. Harrington, would you like to say a few words?" All eyes turned to me, and I felt a momentary panic. Public speaking had always been Harold's domain, while I remained in the background, the supportive wife and mother. But Harold wasn't here, and I was no longer content to remain in the background of my own life. I rose slowly, conscious of arthritic knees and tired feet. "Thank you, Linda. I'm not one for speeches, but I would like to say that it has been my privilege to share this meal with all of you. For many years, I've expressed my love for my family through cooking, believing that nourishing bodies was a way of nurturing connections. Today, I've learned that true connection requires more than just providing. It requires participating, being present, seeing, and being seen." I glanced around the room, meeting the eyes of strangers who already felt less strange, and family members who suddenly appeared in a new light. "Easter is about renewal and transformation," I continued, surprising myself with my steady voice. "Today has certainly been transformative for me. Thank you all for welcoming my family and me into this community celebration." Spontaneous applause broke out, warming me with its genuine appreciation. As I sat down, I caught sight of Eleanor watching me with an unreadable expression. Our eyes met across the room, and I saw something shift in my eldest daughter's face. Not quite understanding, not quite acceptance, but perhaps the beginning of both. The meal eventually wound down, and the inevitable cleanup began. Without discussion or direction, my family pitched in alongside community volunteers, clearing tables, washing dishes, and packing up the few leftovers for distribution to those who could use them. "Mother," Michael approached as I wiped down a serving tray. The mayor was extremely impressed with our family's community involvement today. He's invited us, all of us, to participate in the town's charity committee. I smiled at my son's predictable focus on networking opportunities. "That's nice, dear. Will you be interested in that?" Michael blinked, seemingly thrown by my question. I thought you would want to coordinate our family's participation. I think each of us should decide individually what commitments we want to make, I replied gently. I may be interested, but I'd need to look at my schedule. Your schedule? Michael repeated, as if the concept of me having a schedule independent of family obligations was foreign to him. Yes, Michael, my schedule. I've been thinking of taking an art class on Thursday evenings, and Wilson has mentioned a senior travel group that sounds interesting. My son stared at me as if I had suddenly grown a second head. I patted his arm affectionately. We can discuss it another time. Would you mind helping Marge carry those empty containers to her van? As the community center emptied and the cleanup neared completion, I found myself back in the kitchen area with Linda, Marge, and surprisingly, all three of my children. Well, said Catherine hesitantly, that was Different. Different good or different bad? I asked, genuinely curious about her perception. Just different, she replied, then added reluctantly, but seeing how happy those children were with the Easter egg hunt Lily organized was rather special. Eleanor, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. You embarrassed us today, Mother. I felt my heart sink at her words, the old guilt threatening to resurface. But, she continued, her voice less certain than I had ever heard it, you also made us see something we've been missing. I've been reflecting on what Lily said at the house, about us erasing you. I'm not sure I agree with how she put it, but I do think perhaps we've taken certain things for granted. It was as close to an acknowledgement as Eleanor was likely to come, and I accepted it with a nod. So what happens now? Michael asked pragmatically. Will you be coming home? The question hung in the air, laden with assumptions and unexamined expectations. Would I return to my house and resume my role, perhaps with minor adjustments to acknowledge today's disruption? Was this merely an aberration, a momentary rebellion to be processed and resolved? I looked at my 3 children, successful, accomplished, adults who nevertheless remained in many ways as dependent on my emotional labor as they had been as toddlers. I loved them deeply, but I could see now that my self-erasure had not served any of us well. Yes, I'll be going home, I said finally. But things will be different. Different how? Eleanor asked cautiously. I smiled, feeling a newfound certainty rising within me. I'm not entirely sure yet, but I know this. I want a seat at the table. Not just physically, but in all the ways that matter. In decisions, in recognition, in the family narrative. And I want to explore who I am beyond just being your mother. Michael looked uncomfortable, Catherine tearful, and Eleanor guarded, each processing my words through the filter of their own relationship with me. We can talk more tomorrow, I added, softening my tone. For now, I'm quite tired and would appreciate a ride home. As we prepared to leave, Lily approached with Kenji. Grandma, is it okay if I stay and help finish up here? Kenji and I volunteered to deliver some meals to people who couldn't make it to the center. Of course, I said, touched by her initiative. That's very thoughtful of you both. Kenji bowed slightly. Mrs. Harrington, thank you for today's lesson. In Japan, we have a saying, Ichigo ichi, one time, one meeting. It means to treasure each gathering as a unique moment that will never come again. Today was a true Ichigo ichi experience. His words resonated deeply with me. How many gatherings had I moved through on autopilot, so focused on execution that I missed the unique moments happening around me? Thank you, Kenji, I replied. I will remember that. As I walked out of the community center into the fading light of Easter Sunday, I felt fundamentally changed. The woman who had risen at dawn to prepare 20 dishes for a family that took her for granted was not the same woman now making her way home after serving those same dishes to grateful strangers. The day's journey, from invisibility to acknowledgement, from taken for granted provider to appreciated participant, had shifted something essential in my understanding of myself and my place in the world. Tomorrow would bring challenging conversations and renegotiated boundaries. The path ahead was unclear, but for the first time in years, it felt like my path, one I was choosing rather than merely accepting. Wilson Finley's words echoed in my mind. Don't go backward. And I wouldn't. The seat I had claimed today, at the community table in my family's awareness and in my own life, was mine now, and I had no intention of giving it up again. 3 weeks had passed since my Easter revelation. Spring had settled fully over Millfield, the dogwoods in my front yard bursting with white blossoms that drifted like snow across the lawn. I sat, on my porch swing, morning coffee in hand, watching the neighborhood come alive with the day's activities. Mrs. Patterson walked her poodle past my gate, waving with considerably more animation than usual. Since the Easter community dinner, which had become something of a local legend, people looked at me differently. No longer just the respectable widow who maintained holiday traditions, I had somehow become interesting. The irony wasn't lost on me. After decades of meticulous meal preparation and immaculate housekeeping, what had finally distinguished me in my community's eyes was walking away from my own dinner table. The wrought iron gate at the end of my walkway creaked open, and Wilson Finley made his slow but determined way toward the porch, leaning heavily on his cane. "Morning, Evelyn," he called. "Got time for a visitor?" "Always for you, Wilson," I replied, genuinely pleased to see him. In the weeks since Easter, we had developed an unexpected friendship, meeting for coffee at Marge's diner, or occasionally, sharing a bench in the town square. He settled onto the porch swing beside me with a grateful sigh. "Beautiful day." "It is," I agreed. "Tea? I just made a fresh pot." "Wouldn't say no." I went inside to fetch another cup, moving with more energy than I had felt in years. The house looked different now, still neat and well-maintained, but altered, in subtle ways that reflected my shifting priorities. Harold's chair in the living room, which I had preserved untouched since his death, now held a basket of yarn and knitting needles. The dining room table, once perpetually ready for family gatherings with my best linens, now supported a half-finished painting from my Tuesday art class. Small changes, but significant ones. Changes that said, this is a living space, not a museum, a family tradition, or a backdrop for performative domesticity. I returned to the porch with Wilson's tea and resumed my seat beside him. "Heard you joined the Senior Center travel group," he said, accepting the cup with a nod of thanks. "News travels. Fast in Millfield," I observed dryly. "Town this size, changing your brand of toilet paper makes the gossip rounds," Wilson replied with a wry smile. "But you joining Marion's old travel club? That's headline news." I laughed softly. "It's just day trips for now. We're going to that new art museum in Lakeville next week. Nothing dramatic." "Doesn't need to be dramatic to be significant," Wilson pointed out. 3 months ago, would you have signed up for anything that took you away from being available to your family? The question gave me pause. He was right, of course. For years, I had structured my life around constant availability. To cook, to host, to listen, to solve problems. The concept of carving out time solely for my own interests had seemed almost selfish, a dereliction of my primary identity as mother and grandmother. "No," I admitted. "I wouldn't have." "And that's why people are talking," Wilson said, sipping his tea. "Not because you're doing anything particularly radical, but because you're doing anything at all for yourself. Makes folks uncomfortable when someone changes the rules mid-game." Before I could respond, a sleek silver car pulled up in front of my house. Eleanor stepped out, immaculately dressed as always, carrying what appeared to be a foil-covered dish. She spotted Wilson on my porch and hesitated visibly before squaring her shoulders and proceeding up the walkway. "Mother," she greeted me with a tight smile. "Mr. Finley." "Morning, Eleanor," Wilson replied easily. "Beautiful day for a visit?" "Yes. Well," she shifted the dish in her arms. "I was in the neighborhood for a client meeting and thought I'd drop by." She extended the dish toward me. "I made blueberry coffee cake. Your recipe, actually." I accepted the dish with genuine surprise. Eleanor hadn't baked anything from scratch in years, not since she had determined that her time was more profitably spent in real estate negotiations than in domestic pursuits. "Thank you, dear. Would you like to join us for some?" Eleanor glanced at Wilson, clearly having anticipated a private conversation with me, then nodded stiffly. "I suppose I could stay for a few minutes." I went inside to slice the cake, leaving Eleanor and Wilson in what I imagined would be uncomfortable silence. When I returned with 3 plates, however, Wilson was regaling my daughter with stories about Millfield in the 1960s, and Eleanor's posture had relaxed slightly. "This looks lovely," I said, examining a slice of the coffee cake. You remembered the streusel topping. It took 3 attempts, Eleanor admitted with uncharacteristic humility. Baking is more precise than I remembered. We ate in surprisingly companionable silence for a few moments. The cake was good, not perfect, a little heavy on the bottom, but a genuine effort. I should get going, Wilson said, finishing his slice and setting the plate aside. Senior Center Board meeting at 11. We're voting on the summer picnic. Budget. He winked at me. Contentious business, that. I walked him to the gate, grateful for his intuitive understanding that Eleanor's visit held purpose beyond coffee cake delivery. Thank you for the company, I said quietly. Anytime, he replied, then added in a lower voice. Remember what we talked about. No backsliding. When I returned to the porch, Eleanor had moved to the wicker chair across from the swing, sitting. With the perfect posture she had maintained since her teenage etiquette classes. Your friend seems nice, she offered, clearly searching for an appropriate observation. Wilson is wonderful company, I agreed, reclaiming my seat on the swing. He doesn't feel the need to fill every silence with conversation. Eleanor's cheeks colored slightly at the gentle rebuke. She had always been uncomfortable with quiet moments, preferring to control interactions through constant direction. Mother, she began after a moment, I've been thinking about Easter, about what happened. Yes? I prompted when she paused. It wasn't our finest moment as a family, she admitted, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her skirt. But I've been reflecting on what you said afterward, about wanting a seat at the table. I think perhaps I didn't fully understand what you meant by that. Coming from Eleanor, this was tantamount to a profound apology. My eldest daughter had always prided herself on her precision in all things, including emotional matters. Admitting to misunderstanding was significant. What do you think I meant? I asked, genuinely curious about her interpretation. Eleanor considered the question with typical thoroughness. Initially, I thought you were being literal, upset about the physical seating arrangement. Then I thought perhaps it was about acknowledgement, about being thanked properly for your efforts. She paused, meeting my eyes directly. But I've come to believe it's about something deeper, about being seen as a complete person, not just as an extension of your role in our lives. Her insight startled me. I had underestimated Eleanor's capacity for reflection, assuming her rigid adherence to social norms made her incapable of this kind of empathetic understanding. That's very perceptive, I said finally. Yes, well, Eleanor straightened her already perfect posture. Catherine and I have been meeting with a family therapist. Michael refuses to join us, of course. He says he's too busy. This revelation astonished me even more than her insight. Eleanor had always dismissed therapy as fashionable nonsense for people who lack self-discipline. That's a surprise, I managed to say. It was Catherine's idea, Eleanor clarified quickly. But I've found it somewhat helpful. Dr. Winters has highlighted some patterns in our family dynamics that are illuminating. I waited, allowing her the space to continue at her own pace. She suggested that we've all been operating from scripts, established long ago, with expectations that were never explicitly discussed, that perhaps we've taken certain things for granted. Eleanor's fingers twisted together in her lap, a nervous gesture I hadn't seen since she was a child facing a difficult piano recital. I would agree with that assessment, I said gently. The thing is, Mother, Eleanor continued, her voice losing some of its customary crispness, I don't know how to do this differently. I don't know how to relate to you as a person rather than just my mother. The roles feel so established. Her vulnerability touched me deeply. Beneath the perfect exterior, Eleanor was genuinely struggling to reconcile the mother she had always known with the woman who had walked away from Easter dinner and was now taking art classes and joining travel clubs. We'll figure it out together, I assured her. It's new territory for me, too. Dr. Winters suggested we might try spending time together doing something neither of us has done before, something that puts us on equal footing. Eleanor's tone made it clear that she found the idea dubious at best. She called it creating new relational patterns outside established dynamics. I considered this. That actually sounds like a good idea. Did you have something in mind? Eleanor reached into her purse and withdrew 2 printed tickets. There's a pottery workshop at the community center next Saturday. 6 weeks, 2 hours each session. She extended the tickets toward me with uncharacteristic hesitation. I thought perhaps, if you're interested. The invitation, so tentative, so unlike Eleanor's usual directive approach to family activities, moved me profoundly. This wasn't my daughter scheduling my time or making demands. This was Eleanor reaching out, offering a shared experience with no predetermined outcome. I would love that, I said, accepting the tickets. Thank you. Relief flickered across Eleanor's face, quickly replaced by her more typical businesslike expression. Wonderful. I've already added it to my calendar. The first session starts at 10 a.m., so I could pick you up at 9:30. Some patterns would take longer to change than others. That sounds perfect, I agreed, hiding my smile. After Eleanor left, I sat quietly on the porch swing, contemplating the unexpected turn our relationship seemed to be taking. Of my 3 children, Eleanor had always been the most difficult for me to connect with, her drive for perfection and control forming a barrier that neither of us quite knew how to breach. This small opening felt significant, a tender shoot emerging from what had seemed like barren ground. My reflections were interrupted by the arrival of the mail carrier, who waved cheerfully as he deposited a bundle in my box. Among the usual bills and advertisements was a thick cream-colored envelope bearing a handwritten address and a Japanese postmark. Curious, I opened it to find a note from Kenji, Catherine's exchange student, accompanied by several photographs. The first showed Kenji with his family in front of a modest home in Kyoto. The second captured him in what appeared to be a university classroom, gesturing animatedly to a group of attentive students. But it was the third photograph that drew my breath away. A perfectly composed shot of me at the community Easter dinner, serving a plate of food to an elderly man whose face was transformed with delight. In the background, Lily could be seen watching me with an expression of such obvious pride and love that tears sprang to my eyes. Kenji's note was brief but touching. Dear Mrs. Harrington, I have returned to Japan with many memories of my time in America, but none more valuable than the lesson you taught at Easter. In my culture, we have a concept called ikigai, the reason for being, the thing that makes life worth living. I believe I witnessed your ikigai awakening that day, as you found joy in serving not out of obligation, but from genuine connection. My students were most impressed by your story, which I hope you do not mind my sharing. They have asked many questions about American family traditions and the courage it takes to redefine one's role within established systems. I have enclosed this photograph as a gift. The photographer in me recognized a pivotal moment worthy of preservation. With deepest respect and gratitude, Kenji Tanaka I studied the photograph again, struck by how different I looked from the carefully coiffed, perpetually accommodating woman I had been for so many years. In Kenji's artistic capture, I appeared vibrant, engaged, fully present, qualities I had feared might have atrophied beyond recovery during my long years of self-effacement. The ringing of my phone pulled me from these thoughts. It was Lily calling between classes at her high school. Grandma, did you get the package from Kenji? He emailed me that he sent you the photos. I just opened it, sweetheart. They're wonderful. Isn't the one of you at the community dinner amazing? Kenji has such a good eye. He captured exactly what I was thinking. How proud I am of you. Her words warmed me. Thank you, Lily. That means a great deal coming from you. I was actually calling about something else, she continued, her voice taking on the careful quality that teenagers adopt when approaching a potentially sensitive subject. You know how I've been helping at the community center since Easter? Yes. Linda mentioned how much everyone appreciates your graphic design work for their programs. Well, they're planning this new initiative for intergenerational skill sharing. The idea is to pair seniors with teenagers to teach each other things. Like teens could help with technology, and seniors could share traditional crafts or cooking. Or whatever. She paused briefly. They asked if I thought you might be interested in leading the cooking component. I considered this unexpected proposal. 3 months ago, I would have automatically agreed, adding yet another commitment to my schedule of service to others, but I had promised myself a new approach to such requests, one that involved honest assessment of my own desires rather than reflexive accommodation. What would it involve exactly? I asked, giving myself time to consider. 2 hours every other week, Lily explained. Teaching basic cooking skills to teenagers, mostly kids from the shelter and some from my school, who signed up. It would be at the community center kitchen, and they'd provide all the supplies. And this is something you're involved with? Yes, she confirmed. I'm coordinating the art portion, teaching seniors how to use digital art programs. It would be kind of cool to both be teaching, don't you think? The idea appealed to me more than I expected. Cooking alongside Lily, each of us sharing our knowledge with others, not as a duty or obligation, but as an expression of our individual gifts. This felt different from the endless meal preparation I had done for family gatherings. This felt like choosing to use my skills in a way that brought me joy. Yes, I said, making the decision. I think I would enjoy that very much. Tell Linda I'll call her this afternoon to discuss the details. After ending the call with Lily, I carried Kenji's photograph into the house, considering where to place it. Not in a drawer or album, but somewhere visible, a reminder of this unexpected new chapter in my life. My gaze fell on the mantelpiece, where formal family portraits had always been displayed in matching silver frames, carefully curated images of perfect family moments that bore little resemblance to the complicated reality of our relationships. On impulse, I removed several of these staged photographs, leaving only those that captured genuine connection. Harold teaching Michael to fish, Catherine's unguarded laugh at her college graduation, Eleanor as a serious-eyed child concentrating on a puzzle. In the center, I placed Kenji's photograph of me at the community dinner. Not a traditional family portrait, but perhaps a more honest representation of who I was becoming. A woman who had walked away from an Easter table where she had no place, only to find herself at a different table, fully present and finally seen. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.